The Eucharist is the summit of the whole Christian life because the faithful bring to it all their prayers and good works, their joys and sufferings. These modest offerings are united to the perfect sacrifice of Christ and are thus completely sanctified and lifted up to God in an act of perfect worship which brings the faithful into divine intimacy. I read that and I had to stop and basically schedule lunch with Monsignor Shadle to make sure that I read that correctly. Basically, in a very direct question to him, I asked, okay, let me make sure I understand this. At the Mass, we offer up our own prayers, our own works, our own sufferings, which are all imperfect. We've never done so perfectly. And in the sacrifice of the Mass, somehow these are united with what is perfect, and therefore what we offer is imperfect, then Christ perfects. Is that right? And he said, yes. Yes. Very good. Okay. In the sacred liturgy, the spiritual offerings of the laity are represented by the presentation of the gifts. That's where we're coming to with the presentation of the gifts. I want to emphasize, this is really remarkable. When I was doing this research, I did not know that in the Tridentine Mass that the gifts were not brought up. It was only actually in talking with Monsignor Shadle that I realized that. And while, don't get me wrong, I love the Tridentine Mass. I'm not dogging it. I'm just saying that what we have with the Novus Ordo Mass is something rather incredible. It makes this concept of the royal priesthood a little bit more obvious. All right. When the gifts are brought up to the altar, I love this quote, it is both meaningful and desirable that the faithful should bring up the bread and the wine. But the document does not explain why it's meaningful. That's one of the things that it hooked me. Okay, it's saying, okay, the presentation of the gifts is important. Bringing up the gifts is important, and then it didn't explain what it was that was important about it. And then when I realized that it wasn't part of the Tridentine Mass, that really grabbed me. The general instruction goes on that in former times the faithful would provide from their own homes the bread and the wine, and the ritual of carrying them up to the altar is still meaningful and of spiritual value. So basically, in days before the Tridentine Mass, when they, I don't know, this would have been well over 400 years ago, or beyond. I'm not exactly sure when this began to happen, but basically at one point you have the laity during the week sometime. They would actually bake the bread, make the wine, along with other things, and then bring those actually to church. So at the presentation of the gifts, it took a long time because a lot of people would come up. The priest would take them all. We've really simplified it. We've got a very efficient process the way that we do it now. In years, let's see. I always thought that the preparation of the gifts was just a way to get more people involved. This wasn't really the case. It certainly does get more people involved, but the meaning goes much deeper than that. The gifts represent the spiritual offerings of the faithful as common priests. You see, when you actually make it in your own home and you bring it, it is literally a work of human hands. It is a work of your hands. When they're brought up and the priest receives them, and at one point in the Mass he says, I'll get to that in just a second. The priest's reference to the bread and wine that we have to offer, which earth has given and human hands have made, this places emphasis upon the gifts being the spiritual sacrifices of the faithful. This is also why the bringing up of the gift starts in the very back and then comes forward. That way it kind of goes through the entire crowd. This is also why when we take up the collection, we put the money in the collection basket, that it's also taken back to the back. Because for we Americans, that is a true sacrifice, the giving of the money. After the priest receives the gifts, he says, through your goodness, we have this bread to offer. We have this wine to offer. Notice the we. That in the very liturgy itself, there's a little bit of the we-ness here. The we have a sacrifice to offer. It's not just the priest has something to offer, but you've brought up an offering as well. Then, this is key. Then the priest says, pray, brethren, that our sacrifice may be acceptable to God. This is not exactly what the Latin says. And it is my understanding that one of the changes in the Latin will be what I'm about to tell you. In Latin, it does not say our. Meum ac vestrum is what the Latin reads. And it's real specifically Pray, brethren, that my sacrifice and yours be acceptable. Let me read that again. Pray, brethren, that my sacrifice, the sacrifice of the priest, and your sacrifice are found acceptable. So when you just gloss over it as our, it doesn't quite grab you the same way. I understand that the new English translation the USCCB recently approved will use both my and yours rather than our. The laity respond then with, may the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands. Now, think about it like this. In Old Testament days, you would bring up your lamb, the priest would receive it, and in some way you would be saying, I hope you find my lamb acceptable, because the priest would examine it. It had to be perfect for the priest to accept it. What we're doing now is we're asking God to accept the spiritual offering that you've just made, represented by the gifts of the bread and the wine. Symbolized by the gifts, the laity give the priests all their efforts, sacrifices, and their very selves. The priest then takes our imperfect sacrifices, transforms them, and unites them with the perfect sacrifice of Christ. Thus, the imperfect sacrifices of the faithful were sanctified and perfected. What we offer as natural becomes supernatural. What begins with our own human effort becomes a divine effort. I sent an email to Archbishop Chaput of Denver, who is just a terrific archbishop. By the way, if you've ever emailed him, he usually responds back within 15 minutes. It's rather incredible. He's very fast in getting back with you. He says, the act of presenting the gifts allows each of us to make an offering of ourselves in our own gifts and limitations, so that we may be transformed like the bread and the wine. You see, the gifts don't just represent your work, which it does, your prayers, which it does, your sacrifices, which it does. It also can represent you. In a sense, you're placing yourself in that basket that's being brought up. That's why, for example, with the mingling of the water and wine, the water represents specifically us. That this is about you being transformed. This being about you becoming a new spiritual being through this very service. It is critical for us Catholics to understand this point. When we faithfully, consciously unite our own sacrifices with the sacrifice of the Mass, our works, efforts, and sufferings take on a whole new realm of effectiveness, power, and meaning. In a world so often hopeless, the faithful can lose hope. Have you guys ever just felt so hopeless that you almost didn't feel like it was even important to pray? I mean, let's face it. I mean, at times the world doesn't always seem to be going our way. What we need to do here is realize that God has given us a vehicle here to multiply the power of our prayers. This is another quote from the documents of the Second Vatican Council. It says, through the ministry of the priest, the spiritual sacrifice of the faithful is completed in union with the sacrifice of Christ, the only mediator, which in the Eucharist is offered through the priest's hands in the name of the whole Church. The little we can give is made to be more. Great hope can be found in this practice. Now, think about it like this. I love the story of the multiplication of the loaves in the New Testament. You know, Jesus has a crowd of several thousand, I think it was like 5,000 or something, and all they have is 2 little fish and 5 loaves to feed this huge crowd. Now, if you think that this was just a miracle of sharing, it wasn't. There was really a multiplication here, and it was for a specific reason. Jesus received the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and then it says he gave thanks. Now, the Greek word there is Eucharistos. Eucharist. He gave thanks. There's a mass image here that he's trying to make. At least that's Jonathan talking. That's what I'm seeing there. And he multiplied this simple 2 fish and 5 loaves to feed the huge crowd. As common priests, the faithful give to Christ our loaves and fishes, which are our works, our prayers, our sacrifices, and then Christ multiplies these offerings and gives them real power. By understanding and applying this concept, the prayers of Christians can be perfected, united with Christ, and in a way literally turned into Christ. This is an awesome way of giving full, conscious, and active participation at Mass. And if you understand this concept, it can become a nuclear spiritual reactor of grace and fruit in your life.